And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to AB Live. My name is Miguel Connor. I am your host and pompatus of Gnosis, as I like to say, and very excited to see you, everyone. Now, people are going into the chat. It's Thursday night, middle of summer, so life is good. And today we definitely have a special show. All shows are special, but these topics tonight are near and dear my heart, and our guest definitely brings a lot to the table. So, with us tonight, we've got Dr. David Litwa. David, it was very nice to have a conversation with you, sharing. I had coffee, you had beer, I think, in Chicago face to face, and it was a great evening. But this is almost, it's not as good, but I'll take it. But thanks for coming back on the show.
Definitely, Miguel. Warm hello to you, to everybody, Vance, Moondog, and the dog behind Miguel. It's great to be back.
Yeah, she's behaving. She's behaving. And with us, yes, we've got the Moondog. Vance, how are you doing today?
I'm just fine. Really, I'm interested in Marcellina. It sounds like a very interesting character. Just the kind of person I like to get to know a little better. 2,000 years later, minus a couple.
Yeah. No, she's amazing, as David calls her, superwoman, and we want to find out why she is a superwoman. And this is from David's new book, and I read it this week, and I truly enjoyed it. The book is right here for those of you who can see it. Carpocrates, Marcellina, and Epiphanes, three early Christian teachers of Alexandria and Rome. And like I was telling David, there's also a very cool, I think, bonus section where he deals with Mystic Mark, or as it used to be called, Secret Mark, Morton Smith's either his great big joke on the world or some sort of arcane text. David takes us down that path and he has his own conclusions. If he wants to give away spoilers, I'll let him do that. But great argument. So what, David? And again, you were recently to talk about The Evil Creator, which was another great book, a great interview. So tell us about this book. Like you said, you wrote it while you were in that endless lockdown in Australia. Tell us about the rest of it.
Yeah, it was a bit of a Gnostic prison, 266 days of hard lockdown. Welcome to democracy, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was very grateful to have the time to write this. And I was very mindful that no other monograph length book on Carpocrates had been written to date. There was a 55-page German pamphlet published in the 30s, which was the longest, but nothing on Carpocrates. And Carpocrates is so important for all, I think, students of Gnosis and of early Christianity and of just human faiths in general to know about. He is unfortunately also the most pilloried and attacked as one of the most licentious of all. In fact, the king of licentiousness, the wild sex orgy, uh, mastermind, who has been essentially slandered in all sorts of heresiological literature. And then modern historians and people on the internet continue to repeat those slanders as if they were historical fact. I found, and I put it in the book, but in reading the encyclopedia entries on Carpocrates, you find some wild and outdated stuff, including stuff that is just purely made up. So what I do, I mean, it's a very simple book. I just bring us back to the sources and show what we can and cannot know. And of course, I've got my own interpretation. People feel free to disagree. But basically, I've got an introduction bringing up the history of research from Nazi Germany in the 30s until the present day. Then I start with our only known actual Carpocratian surviving source. I methodologically, I don't start with the heresiologists because that is a big mistake. I start with the actual words of a Carpocratian, and the only words that we have are about a 520 word quote from Carpocrates' son, Epiphanes. Then I talk about the heresiological reports. Then I talk about Mystic Mark or the Epistle to Theodore. And then I bring it all together in the conclusion, profiling the Alexandrian context, as well as Carpocrates, Epiphanes, and the most famous disciple of all, yes, Superwoman, Marcellina, the only known, and I repeat this ad infinitum because it's so important, she is the only known female leader of a Christian church in Rome in the 2nd century. I mean, really in the 1st or 3rd, but she is entirely unique as leading that movement and bringing Carpocratianism, or Carpocratian Christianity, as I like to say it, to the heart, the beating heart of empire, and making sure it made an impression that lasted all these thousands of years.
Wonderful. Yeah, and you do a great job, and that's for sure. For the audience, again, I'd make sure you write your questions. We will probably tonight only take whoever super chats towards the end, as we are a little bit strapped for time, but we will try to get to your questions. So yeah, that's even. I mean, Carpocrates it's an odd paradox, which I always thought when I first started studying this, David, because on one end you have this sort of individual, this deep thinker who definitely vibes mainlines the Stoics and the Cynics, and he's Platonizing. He's almost got an Eastern vibe of detachment and indifference. At the same time, he's out there like Led Zeppelin or Wilt Chamberlain and tour, just orgies and sex magic. Even Crowley is said to have based a lot of his mass and a lot of his ideas on the Alexandria perverts, if you would. So why don't we separate the myth from the man, as Judas says in Jesus Christ Superstar, and you all will see where we'll be. Yes, the orgy and the sex magic. What's the truth that you think, David?
Well, again, you've got to start with Epiphanes, who's both the son and the disciple of Carpocrates. And Epiphanes writes a book called On Justice.
Wait, before you do that, there's a quote that made me chuckle in your book by a recent Christian historian. This is what he thought of Epiphanes. And you're even like, bless your heart, a nasty-minded adolescent of somewhat pornographic tendencies, church historian Henry Chadwick.
Yes, a stuffy Englishman of the 40s and 50s. Yeah. Who still has an influence today. This quote is often quoted. Some people who agree with it, some people who obviously disagree with it for good reason. I think anyone who has read Epiphanes, and you have to read him through Clement of Alexandria, I think anyone who's read that material can't possibly think of him as pornographic. He writes just as any other philosopher would, and he, like Plato, but also like Zeno the Stoic and Diogenes the Cynic, writes a book called On Justice, or in case of Plato, also called it the Republic or Politeia. And in this experiment, this philosophical experiment, sort of, you have an ideal society portrayed, and Plato famously portrayed his ideal society as, we don't want any marriage. Or essentially what he said was, we want group marriage, or what in the States I guess we call plural marriage after the Mormon practice. But basically you have a society in which no two people are bound together for life, but all men are bound together to all women, and they proceed to have sex by a series of allotments that are controlled by the government. And this was Plato's grand idea. And then the children that are produced from those unions are the everyone is their parent, essentially. They don't have two parents. Everyone in the state is their parents. And this vision of society where men didn't own women was then repeated by Zeno the Stoic and Diogenes the Cynic, and we find it also in Epiphanes, our early Carpocratian Christian. And he says, yeah, that we live in a society where we shouldn't own anything, that owning something, the basic idea of capitalism, owning something is ontologically and philosophically wrong. We don't own anything. We die. We're born into this world and we die with absolutely nothing. This idea of ownership is a human convention, which almost always creates injustice in a society because people own, much more than anyone else, and people own people. Mm-hmm. And in his day, it was slavery. And also with husbands and wives. I mean, obviously, no one in the ancient world ever said, I own my wife, but that's how they often treated her. She became a sexual object in which her sexuality was restricted and reserved entirely for the husband, and you could kill another man who threatened the sexuality of your wife, mm-hmm. because you owned her body, so to speak. And what Epiphanes said, it was that this whole system is wrong, is based on human convention, and the society in which we ought to live is much more like the society in the Book of Acts, that ideal picture of Christian society where no one owned anything. Okay, and that includes women, slaves, children, etc. So the idea that when Moses says that you should not lust after your neighbor's wife, mm-hmm. Epiphanes said that was ridiculous, because that assumed that the wife was just like a possession, like your neighbor's ox or your neighbor's house or your neighbor's slave. So that very idea presupposes humans possessing humans or possessiveness in some way, and that must be wrong. Therefore, this particular Mosaic regulation must be wrong. Now, Clement, when he reads that, thinks that what Epiphanes is saying is that you can commit adultery, basically. And he accuses Epiphanes of saying that, we can now just have orgies with everyone. But in fact, Epiphanes never says that, and nor do we have any evidence that he set up any sort of commune. Now, I should say, it's perfectly fine if he did. That experiment has been run throughout the history of religion. Okay, famously, the Shakers did this in the States. But we have no evidence that Epiphanes ever had sex with anyone, frankly. He died at the age 17. Okay, he was the son of one mother. Her name was Alexandria, and Alexandria was married to Carpocrates, and it's never said that Carpocrates had any other ladies in the vicinity. And Marcellina was almost certainly unmarried, and she's never accused in any respect whatsoever of being sexually profligate. So these heresiologists are really pulling something essentially out of their own rear end, as far as I'm concerned, when they are saying that there are these mass sex orgies. And what they're doing, I think, is they're taking a very common criticism of all Christians and then scapegoating the Carpocratians, saying that, oh, well, you guys think that we, F our mothers and daughters in the darkness of night in the Eucharistic ceremonies. Actually, that's just these Carpocratians over here. So that, I think, is the logic of what's going on. It's a scapegoating logic. Now, that's not to say that maybe Epiphanes would have approved of a plural marriage if he had the power. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not excluding that, nor am I saying that plural marriage is necessarily something licentious. I mean, I don't apply any kind of value judgment here, but I just look at the evidence and what we have, and I don't see a whole lot of evidence for anything that the heresiologists say when it comes to orgies.
Well said, and like you say in your book, if Marcellina had even stepped out of line or even shown her ankle on the street in ancient times, they would have pounced on anything, because that's what you did to women. You try to vilify them as soon as they kind of gets in. They don't. They got nothing on Marcellina that they can use, or they would have used it. So, and
Exactly.
it's amazing how Epiphanes is creating this sort of communist, anarchist thing. I always find, the Stoics and the Cynics, because as somebody said, if you take Karl Marx to his natural logical conclusion, you get to anarchism. Every worker creates, there is no state. And it's fascinating that, 2000 or more years ago, there was these thinkers trying to promote this. So it's fascinating. So what about the other polemic against Carpocrates and his followers, which was the black magic? What do you think of that? Summoning demons and all this other, Harry Potter stuff.
Well, I think it's perfectly fine if you want to say that an early Christian group was summoning lower spiritual beings.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, this is what early Christians do all the time. I mean, some of them do it today. Some of them pray to angels today. I mean, or saints or whatever, and they then do magical operations. But the question is, I think, more of a value judgment. I mean, we don't, magic was against Roman law. Okay, you could be killed for doing it. We don't have those values. I mean, magic is just fine. Magic is Harry Potter. I mean, but there's also white and black magic. And I think, I think what we're dealing with here is mostly, or almost entirely, what I would, I guess, in a popular sense, just call white magic. They might have used dream divination. They might have invoked lower spiritual beings to get messages about the future. Perfectly fine. Everybody's doing that on the street. Everybody's doing that, Christians and non-Christians. That's just how they think. But then the question is, what then are the heresiologists doing? Well, they're twisting the knife there and saying, well, if you're calling on lower spiritual beings, those must be all evil demons, right? And if you're using some magical practices, you must be using all of them. So they must be, using love charms and erotic spells and calling on nasty demons and people who have died violently, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in fact, that's not. There's just no evidence of that whatsoever in terms of what you read in Epiphanes, okay, and in Marcellina. You never see her or Epiphanes talking about that stuff at all. It's just not. It's not important to them. And I highly doubt that they used erotic love magic, because their whole goal in life was to imitate their understanding of Jesus. And Jesus was the man who had conquered his passions. And so if you conquer your passions, it doesn't make much sense to try to excite those passions through the use of potions and incantations. Now, I can't absolutely exclude that they might have used that stuff. I mean, love is love, right? I mean, let a thousand flowers bloom. These people aren't against sex, obviously. Okay, so it's not really useful to call them Gnostics in a kind of Hans Jonas sense. They don't have any problem with the body. They don't have any problem with sex. Don't have any problem with. They don't have a Yaldabaoth. So they are just their own people, and doing their own thing and doing divination. And at one point, Irenaeus says that they were using healing practices and doing divination through young boys. Maybe. Mm-hmm. So was everybody else.
Was there any Neoplatonic influence on Carpocrates or Marcellina, where they, maybe there's a tie-in there because Socrates, diamond, and all the Greeks were into things that church fathers may have frowned upon that sound like their criticisms.
Sure. Well, yeah. So we're pre-Plotinus, so I wouldn't call it Neoplatonism, but you're absolutely right. So you have a daimon. Carpocratians are deep thinkers, and they're interested, and they know the Platonic sources. So they definitely know about daimones, and daimones for the Platonists aren't necessarily evil at all. So that's what I mean by lower spiritual being. They aren't demons. They're friendly. They're nice. They might be a little bit tricky, a little bit spunky, but they're nice beings. Nice to get to know. Exactly.
The other polemic would be with the Carpocratians. It should be mentioned that they were universalists, so everybody makes it. Like you said, Jesus was basically the guy who was self-actualized, who, like you said, conquered his passions, remembered all his lives. But church fathers and occultists have said that they thought of the famous redemption through sin, that if I do all these bad things, I'll eventually get saved and go through my life. So can you clarify or tell us your view on how Carpocrates and his group saw reincarnation?
Yeah, so Carpocratians basically they bridge. There's fluid identities here. They have both a Christian and a Platonic Pythagorean identity. So they fully accept the doctrine of transmigration. They fully see that as part of God's system of justice. There's no heaven or hell. There's just a system of transmigration. And you've got to go through every experience of life in order to become good, because this world is God's gymnasium. And if you fail your gym program, you'll just be sent back to the beginning to try again, right? That's the way they conceive God's justice. You'll just be born again into another life until you get it right, okay? And Plato said that you have to be incarnated. This is the Phaedrus. He says you have to be incarnated about 10 times to get it right, and that's if you're only good. I mean, if you're really good. Most people need thousands of times, but philosophers, they only need 3 incarnations, and then they get it right. And the Carpocratian theory of reincarnation was that Jesus only needed 1. And so that's what makes him special, right? Jesus was a guy with a divine soul, but his divine soul is in quality not any different than the one that's in you or me. It's just he's the guy who gets it right on 1 try. It's like you put him on a bike when he's 3 years old and he just starts riding without the training wheels. I mean, how does this happen? Well, that's what makes him special, right? And so our goal is to go through life once. And the way we do that is by following the model of the ultimate sage, in this case, Jesus. And that's how we go through every experience of life. Now, it's still a mystery what exactly they meant by that term, okay, going through every experience of life. But it certainly did not mean what the heresiologists said that it meant, which is the redemption through sin idea, okay? And the reason why I think we can know that is because, again, all these Carpocratians are trying to follow their vision of Jesus, the super sage. And Jesus, first of all, I mean, the guy doesn't even have sex. He doesn't even seem to like women. I mean, if you're reading the Gospels, I mean, he's basically, yeah, I would call him, frankly, asexual. I mean, sorry, Dan Brown, but he's not interested in erotic relationships. He is a man who has mastered his passions. So he's in control. He doesn't experience violent emotions like greed or anger or hatred or jealousy. He has none of that. He's totally conquered that. And he goes through life like that, experiencing all reality in a single go. And that's the model. So if a heresiologist comes up and says, well, yeah, okay, we've got to experience everything. Well, that would include sin, right? No, I mean, no, it wouldn't, because you're following the model who doesn't go through that. And that's the point. And that's how we know that the heresiologists slandered rather than reported, or they twisted what they reported and drew the worst of all possible conclusions. And over time, it just got worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, I think there's what the saying, Matthew 5:25, I say unto you, you shall not go out thence until you pay the very last farthing. So it wasn't that what they were using to say you got to experience all these lives before you can get out.
So yes, they viewed this world again as like a daimonic gymnasium in which the cosmos was controlled by lower rulers, and basically each of these lower rulers was watching over to see if it was essentially doing the grading or the marking, as we call it here in Australia, where did you get that right, and then they tick the box. The daimones look to see if you've performed every single action, and if you haven't, they just send you back into another body. So paying the last penny is doing everything, checking every box, and making sure that you've experienced the fullness of life in order for you to graduate to the supercosmic level. And by the way, this isn't uniquely Carpocratian. If any of you are familiar with the sentences of Sextus, this interpretation of Jesus' saying appears there as well. So this is part of the broader Alexandrian context. But this passage is important because it shows that Carpocratians were reading kind of a mixed form of Matthew and Luke. We don't know what they were reading, but it's not from Matthew. It's some sort of mixture. So it's a bit of a mystery.
All right. You see that dog? You could be a human. A few more tryouts. You'll move up to a human. Have to lay there on the bed bored all day.
I think she would make a pretty good human, but from what I've seen.
She'll be running the podcast in the next one.
Why would she want to go down in the hierarchy, though?
We
ought to
ascribe
to be dogs.
Cats. The cats are above humans, I think.
I'll say one more very brief thing about that is that by the time we get to the 1st and 2nd century, most Platonists and Pythagoreans are having real trouble with the idea of animal incarnations. And so you'll see a limitation there, whereas Plato seemed to have no problem with us coming into frogs and ants. But by the time of Carpocrates, and I think Carpocrates basically affirms this point, there's no animal incarnations because the human soul, the divine human soul, is only suited for human bodies. And that's why you can eat everything. Whereas a traditional Pythagorean would say, you can't eat meat. Carpocrates says, that's fine, because we don't believe animal souls ever reach the cows.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I think Carpocrates is just fascinating because this fusion of Greco-Roman thought with Christianity and Egyptian thought, it's all there. And what about the idea? The other question people were asking too is, what about the Jewish law or the idea of angels controlling this earth? What does old Carpo think of that?
Well, it's interesting. So Clement, when he quotes Epiphanes, and he sees that Epiphanes is very critical of this specific Mosaic law, which is Exodus 20:17, that you shall not essentially covet, in the Old English, your neighbor's wife. And Epiphanes says that this law, its very presuppositions are wrong because there's just no ownership or human possession of bodies anyway. So it must be wrong. And what the heresiologists do is they say, well, the entire Old Testament then must be wrong. Or Epiphanes rejected the entire Mosaic law. And that, again, is a huge heresiological inference that is just, there's no good evidence for that. All we've got is Epiphanes criticizing that very specific law. Now, however, because Irenaeus says in his report that Jesus rejected Jewish law as human convention, That's how we get a fuller picture of the larger critique. And so I'm prepared to say that, yes, Carpocratians did reject Mosaic law. The same thing they accepted. They rejected Roman law and Athenian law too, and not in terms of practice. They didn't then go run around and fuck people or kill people. It's just that it's just like we recognize, like in America or wherever you are, maybe in Russia right now, if you're drafted, there's a draft law for a war that you don't believe in. Well, you don't believe in that law, and so you try to dodge the draft. But if you're not drafted, you just live in that society where you think it's unjust laws. Or I guess now in America today, we could use the Roe v. Wade example. I mean, people in America believe that it's a fundamental human right that a woman can make a decision about her body during pregnancy, but they still live in a country where that is now seems to be well under threat. Okay, so they don't agree with the law, but they're not out there being lawless, right? So there's that distinction to be made. So that's, I think, where Carpocratians are. They reject all human laws on principle, but they are not lawless. They believe in divine justice, and they pursue justice in imitation of what they see in Jesus and other sages, Pythagoras, Plato, etc.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. And well, why don't we talk about Superwoman Marcellina herself? Definitely overlooked. She was, well, I think you say nobody really even says she was a Carpocratian, but she opened a church in Rome to house Carpocratians or teach Carpocratians. Or how is it? How did she get to a long trek from Alexandria to Rome?
Yeah, we wish we knew more about her early stage of life, but from what we can infer, and it is an inference, but I think a good one, it's that she was with Carpocrates in the late 130s and 140s and early 150s in Alexandria. She learned Carpocratian lore, and then she went out as a recruiter based on her own authority and as an apostle in a looser sense, as someone who is sent. And she went to the imperial capital, and she successfully recruited a whole bunch of Christians there to join her specific group. And this is my favorite line from Irenaeus. The way that Irenaeus describes her recruiting process is she exterminated many people. And so we know she was successful because she gets many people to join. She's probably fairly rich. She's not attached to a husband. She can afford her own home, have her own home church, start her own rituals. And we know part of those rituals were the veneration of a picture of Jesus, which they thought was commissioned by Pilate. So it was accurate down to the very details, the very fine details. She sponsored a baptism of fire after your water baptism, in which you'd get a brand mark on the back of your right ear, indicating that you had been baptized in fire. She also called her group Gnostics. And I highlight this because this is very important for the whole Gnosticism question. Irenaeus very clearly says, and in fact, he's most clear of all when he gets to the most Marcellinians. He says, Gnostikos, they call themselves Gnostics. Now, he says this actually of no other group, okay, not even the so-called Sethians. That's, a matter of scholarly interpretation when you get to chapter 11 of book 1 of Against Heresies. But in chapter 25, when he gets to the Carpocratians, he's clear as day that the Marcellinian group in Rome, from which he's getting his information, called themselves Gnostics. And what do they mean by that? Well, it doesn't mean that that was their only or their specific name, but it was part of that common Christian claim in the 2nd century that they were the deep knowers. They were the enlightened ones. Okay. I think that their primary name was Marcellinians because that's what Celsus and others told us. Or you could call them Carpocratians. At one point, they're even called Harpocratians. There's some kind of confusion about what to call them. But they definitely did partially call themselves the knowers. And that's really important that they are one among many groups who are taking that name Gnostic and adapting it for themselves, even though other people are calling them other things. So Marcellina is, I think, herself, Celsus calls her a rhetor, or a sophist, a sophistria, and that's a female orator. He says that she's a siren. A siren is from Greek mythology. I hope everybody knows it, from the Odyssey. But what it means here, I think, at the very least, is that she was very, not personally attractive. I mean, I don't know what she looked like, but her message was attractive. And she was a powerful speaker. And she must have been to recruit in the imperial capital as a woman without any of the rights that, are available to women today. And so she must have been an incredibly intrepid lady to have so much success in the imperial capital, where Christians and everybody else are fighting and clawing their way to get, a clientele.
Like in those days, making it as a rock star in LA or a painter in New York City, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Rome.
Absolutely.
Charismatic, right?
Yeah.
She must have been. And again, we have to go through inference, but she must have had an incredible intellect and must have been an incredible speaker.
I'm going to assume she was hot. I'm sorry. But my fantasies, and those are mine.
Well, you get the baptism of fire. That's hot.
she can get behind my lobe any day, baby. But, and what about the idea that there's lore that she had the original picture of Jesus Christ commissioned by Pilate, but she did use icons. We know that.
Yeah, well, that's really striking about her, and again, it's one of those things that really contradicts, this like classic, I guess, portrait of the quote unquote Gnostics is that they're body haters. Well, Marcellina must have, in some sense, loved the body, and she was very interested in Christ's body and his physical features, and so she's the only known Christian who said in this early period that she knew exactly what Jesus looked like. I mean, exactly.
Kenny Loggins, Michael McDonald, maybe Barry Gibb. I don't know. Just kidding.
So, and I mean, it's a great shame that picture was lost, but it was venerated alongside pictures or small statues of Pythagoras and Plato. Now, she made no claim to have accurate depictions of those guys, but the reason why these people are important is because they incarnate the souls that are super sage kind of souls. And in fact, Epiphanes was deified because his father, Carpocrates, thought that he also had the soul of a super sage. He died at 17, which in Greek reckoning might have been 16, actually. But he was already writing philosophical treatises that, people didn't write until their 40s or 50s. So obviously, Carpocrates thought that there was something divine about Epiphanes' soul, and therefore there was a whole temple and library space set up for him by his parents, who must have been rich and well off, on the island of Cephallenia, where his mother was from.
Yeah, and wasn't Marcellina also associated, even though she didn't, with some of the big time women from the 1st century, Mary, Martha, and Salome?
Yeah, so this is an interesting little side note, but when Celsus talks about Marcellina, he only refers to Marcellinians, and he seems to break up the group into 4 different memberships, which followed apostolic women. He names Mariami, or Mary Magdalene, Martha, and Salome. And what I think is here that Celsus, whom I think is probably in Alexandria, he probably just got it wrong. And what is really happening is that Marcellina is appealing to specifically female apostles. And Celsus just assumes that, multiple apostles means multiple groups. But I think that Marcellina is our best documented evidence for why we have the Gospel of Mary probably appearing in Egypt, why Salome is such an important character in the Gospel of Thomas and in the Gospel according to the Egyptians, which is unfortunately lost. And Martha is really unsung apostolic woman, but she's there too. And actually in later church history, she also becomes famous. But all of these apostolic women, the person who upheld their importance was probably Marcellina herself, because she looked back to women specifically as the originators of her own Gnostic or Carpocratian tradition.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, what a groundbreaking person. And moving back to Epiphanes, I wanted to ask you too, because it really helps contextualize the theology. But he had something called monadic gnosis. Could you tell the audience what is this monadic gnosis?
Yeah, monadic gnosis, it depends on your interpretation, but the way that I take it as a reference to the very popular theology of the day, which was Pythagorean numerical theology, in which people who didn't know anything about the Big Bang, but early philosophers and scientists were trying to talk about, well, how do we have something come from nothing? Mm-hmm. And they ended up, basing themselves on a theory of numbers in which all reality must have stemmed from one single thing, a number, the number one, or the monad. And that's how you get multiplied numbers. And that's how you get the proliferation of all reality. And various different groups in philosophical sects take this in different ways, but they all go back to an originally Pythagorean, or perhaps if you like, Neo-Pythagorean core, where it's the monad. Everything comes from one, which is so central to their own theory of creation.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah, and I love again, your book is wonderful. I love how you start where you bring all these very cool scholars from the 20th century, like Gershom Scholem, Hans Jonas, Simon Petrarman, Morton Smith. There were some mavericks back then, and it's fun, like how Gershom Scholem is like, these Carpocratians are like the Frankian Jews, nihilistic Gnostics. So it was kind of a fun time back in the 20th century. You could go to some cool places, huh?
Yeah, I'm offering on my Patreon. I want to offer, several courses or several videos more on Carpocrates, but I really want to show people why Morton Smith loved the heresiological portrait of Carpocrates, because he licked his lips whenever he saw licentiousness. And I think that Morton Smith is probably the real religious nihilist here. And he, in his letters with his teacher, Gershom Scholem, he convinces Gershom that these Carpocratians are, nihilistic libertines. Mm-hmm. And then it's Scholem who says, oh, well, that reminds me of the Frankists. And then he goes on in his book, Major Currents in Jewish Mysticism, and mentions the Carpocratians as these, wild, nihilistic redemption through sin people. And then this idea takes off. And Morton loved that. Morton absolutely thought that was priceless, because he liked that licentiousness, and he ultimately wanted to bring out the picture of the licentious Jesus. And I think all of that is in the mix. Morton's hideous smile when all this blows up with this so-called mystic mark. There'll be a book on The Secret Gospel of Mark, I think published very soon here from Jeff Smith and Brent Landau. But I came up with all my conclusions independently and separately. And I offered to show them the conclusions. They said no. So I've yet to see what they think about it. But I think the long and short of it is you've got to understand Morton Smith's theology before you tackle the Epistle to Theodore, which is embeds mystic Mark.
Yeah. Oh, well, Morton Smith, he was brilliant. His Jesus the Magician is such a good book. Obviously, it's dated, and now it's, freelance spiritualists instead of magicians, but he was a brilliant guy. Yeah. But yeah, I guess he had his own agenda, which we all do. It's just a matter if you're aware of it or how it comes out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's bad or good, but I do think, yeah, it's really important to understand. I think that Morton Smith was, like many religious Americans. I mean, he was an Anglican priest at one point. He got really, really hurt by religion, and he left the church, and he never ever came back. And then throughout his career, he was always sort of looking over his shoulder. And in some way, I see a bit of Nietzschean ressentiment in him, which is, again, neither bad nor good, but I think it's really important to understand.
No, I mean, I understand. It's we're talking 50s and 60s. We think we're where we are today. I mean, this is a time where black people couldn't drink out of the same fountains. Being a homosexual could get you fired, outcast. They were giving lobotomies to gay people in the 60s and 50s. So it was still pretty dark ages. So I can understand the pain and suppression, and or I can imagine the horror of somebody like Morton Smith or any gay guy trying to live under, in the dark of things. So it wasn't, we weren't that enlightened. We really have come quite a bit in the last 20, 30 years. So, but now we're getting into social things. Where's Epiphanes? Where's Epiphanes to save us? So and for the audience, please check out David's Patreon. It's awesome. Like I told him, I love to spend a Saturday night as geeking out instead of watching a movie or anything. I will put on his Patreon. He's got these great videos, 10, 20 minutes, and they're so educational. Last one or one of the few was arguments for the Gospel of Thomas coming from Egypt. But he goes through all the great Gnostic texts, from the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of the Egyptians, on the origin of the world was an excellent one. And I love how you showed all the different arguments, and then you argue or use somebody's arguments that it was actually the Ophites who were behind on the origin of the world, instead of what most scholars think, that it's either a hodgepodge or a Manichaean work. But great argument for the Ophites being behind it. So great videos, and I think you will learn a lot. And he puts PDFs with book reviews, critiques, and all that. So definitely check out. I will have them on the show notes. And as we get to the end, why don't we take some questions, and then we'll wrap it up with David. Vance,
can I just add real quick something?
Sure.
So for those who join the Patreon, this book is ridiculously priced, and I understand that. For those of you who join the Patreon, I'm offering a massive discount, and I will send you this book myself in the mail. And so don't worry about that. Obviously, the Kindle is cheaper. The paperback will be coming out in a year. But if you join the Patreon, I can get you a discount. Anyway, go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay. We actually had one super chat from Occult Fan. Hello, Nathan Lee. Now, this is a mouthful, so here I go. Can Dr. Litwa compare the Java, Indonesian, Indian, Tantrika transgressive practices? And are there any other notable groups, which may include other Christians as well? What groups today embody this?
Well, I'm not an expert in that, in the that material, so I can't directly compare. I will just say though that I don't deny that there are groups, and there have been groups throughout time, that have viewed transgressing human conventions as soteriologically important, that is important for the redemption of their soul or their spirit or wherever, and where open transgressiveness is important. What I am pushing in this book, however, is that we need to base ourselves on evidence, and that means that we as scholars and interested readers have a moral responsibility not to repeat the slanderous and bad press of heresiological reporting and convert that into something sweet sounding like redemption through sin or transgressivity or something like that. Again, they didn't, in my view, Carpocratians did not adhere to any human system of human law. They were entirely for divine law and divine justice. And that must have had huge social implications. But we've got to follow the evidence. And so I think that when you're looking at Indonesia or the Shakers or whoever, or the Frankists, I mean, go study the Frankists. There is good evidence that they were, effing each other. I mean, and that's fine. There's no judgment on that. I mean, if that's the way they understood their religion and spirituality, yes, there are people who have orgies for religious reasons, but we can't just say that, because, this is sort of like a universal spirituality and that it must have been happening with the Carpocratians. No, we've got to follow the evidence and take that where it leads us. So I apologize. I'm not able to make that specific comparison.
What about other Gnostic sects like the Borborites, Nicolaitans, the whole other slew of Gnostics that were accused of partying, rock and roll all night and party every day like kissing? Do you take them with the same grain of salt, or?
Well, I think that we always, again, my methodological point here, it does apply not just to the Carpocratians, but to all of these early Christian groups. And the point is not so much never trust a heresiologist, although you might follow that as a good maxim. But the point is that when you have a primary source from an actual religious devotee telling you what their vision of the world is, you always prioritize that material over the heresiological report. Okay. So, and this is so important because when people want to learn about, these early Christian Gnostics, they turn to Irenaeus as if he's some kind of encyclopedia. And he is probably the easiest to read, but that's an absolutely deadly method. I mean, why would you do that? Please don't. Please don't. Try to go after the primary sources and see the logic, both theologically and in terms of how they viewed salvation, before you believe the heresiological report. That's my only advice, I guess, my plea as a scholar. And then go where it takes you. Okay. In the end, you may disagree with me, which is totally fine. I welcome that.
No, makes sense until we get the gospel of Epiphanes goes to Animal House. We just have to, or something like that.
And I should say that I have a chapter on the Nicolaitans in my book, Found Christianities. So you can get my take on the Nicolaitans directly. I also talk about the so-called Borborites in an academic article, which I am planning to put on Patreon. So I'm going to give you exactly what I think of the evidence of those people. But I definitely methodologically, I don't accept the heresiological reporting immediately. You have to study everything around it, find the primary source, check all the facts and data, and then make your conclusion.
Makes sense. Vance?
Yeah, we just got another super chat from Vesper. How might Carpocratians relate to the Therapeutai?
Oh, well, that's a good question. So I'm actually not entirely sure there. Certainly, the Therapeutai. Some people have said that they're a completely mythical group. Some people have said that they really did exist in first century CE Alexandria. They're reported on by Philo. Philo says that they were really, really sexually abstemious, that they heard the Mosaic Law and they were cool with it. And so I guess the major point of difference would be the Carpocratian community isn't practicing anything of the Mosaic Law. Or if they do, it's what they see it overlapping with their idea of divine justice. And they are obviously Carpocratians are not a Jewish group. They're a Christian group. Carpocratians are also not known for ascetic behavior. They're not divorced from society. They're living right in the center of Alexandria and Rome, which are the two biggest cities. They're highly urban, and they're highly intellectual, reading Plato and Pythagoras. And so I would say that, yeah, there's probably a number of important differences there. And the other thing is we know the Carpocratians definitely did exist. So,
all right. One last one from actually a scholar from Australia, our friend Joanna
Yes.
Kujawa. Go ahead, Vance.
Okay, Dr. Joanna says they accepted sexuality, but Jesus had to be asexual. And is the old boring presumption that a perfected human has to be asexual? Was that part of the Carpocratian creed? That last one.
I guess I was speaking of my own sort of take on the Gospels. The Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I don't see, and I could be wrong, but I don't see an erotic element myself. That's not to say that Carpocratians didn't. So I have to say that I don't actually know. But what I do know of the Carpocratian Jesus is that he is a master of his passions. That doesn't necessarily mean asexuality, but it means that he's in full bodily control. And that was the goal which many ancients strove for. And I think, yeah, in Carpocratian society, I don't think they had a problem with marriage. I don't think they had a problem with sex. I don't think they thought that sex hindered them. This is one huge distinction between them and Sethians and other vigorously ascetic groups who think that, the daimones are going to keep you down if you're having sex and bringing up children for the archons. We don't see any of that in Carpocratian thought. They just don't have a problem with sex. That doesn't mean that they're sex maniacs, but it also means that they don't fit the Hans Jonas definition of Gnosticism. They're not world deniers. They're not body haters. They're not marriage deniers. They love the body. They have a picture of Jesus. They embrace sex and sexuality. And they want to experience everything in the world. So yes, that would include sex.
And so they believe the physical physical Christ as opposed to just spiritual or illusory Christ. Can't bring up the term, the heresy where Jesus is just an illusion.
That's
fine.
Thank you.
I think we should just throw out that term. But yeah, I definitely Jesus is absolutely a real man. Definitely physical. No, not even a hint of doubt about any of that. And Marcellina knows what he looks like. And when her picture of Jesus got destroyed, we lost forever what Jesus looked like. I mean, that was important to her, the physical man. And that's something that's really, really distinctive.
Where'd the snakes come from? I've been dying to ask that. I mean, they were associated with snake handling, weren't they? The Carpocratians? Or am I getting them confused with the other group?
Ophites used to kiss the snakes in the mouth, according to.
Okay, no snakes for the Carpocratians.
Yep, sorry, no snakes. And again, I think that this is why the Carpocratians are so useful for people for rethinking what you think a Gnostic is. Because, yes, there's no snakes. There is no prohibition of sex. There's no world hating. There's no body hating. There is no Yaldabaoth. And there doesn't even seem to be many negative rulers hopping around. They seem to live in a pretty bright world where they think that they can live in a just society. And they call themselves Gnostics. There you go.
They do dream incubation,
dream incubation, but that's so standard. Yeah, I mean, it's like something everyone would do. It's like going to the church and praying. Yeah, I mean, it's there's nothing out of the ordinary for dream incubation for ancient world. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been a great discussion. I think Vance and I are going to hang out to do some house cleaning and a few other things. But David, I know you have to go, and I really enjoyed our talk as always. As I enjoy talking to you in Chicago, I enjoy interacting with you on Patreon. David will answer your questions if you write a comment. So he's always there to engage. So check out his Patreon and definitely check out his books. They're excellent. Full of gnosis. So David, as always, thank you.
Well, thank you guys. And I really appreciate having this opportunity to get knowledge about this book out. I really believe in Carpocrates, Marcellina, Epiphanes. I think all of these people are super important and super knowledgeable, and that they are still as transformative today as they were so many years ago. And it's so important to know who they are and what they represent. So I'm so grateful that I can come on and talk about this book. And there'll be much more in-depth stuff on the Patreon. So come join the community.
Awesome. Definitely check it out. Yeah, support your alternative and independent content creators, because that's where the knowledge is, and that's how we win this game. Well, David, thank you very much. And yeah, you're over there and it's Friday. Enjoy your weekend.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Good to be with you.
Appreciate it. You too, guys.
Good night. Thank you.
Take care.
Awesome. Well, I'm trying to think what house cleaning to have for the audience. If you have any general questions, let me know. If you want to do an Ask Me Anything, I had a couple things to say. Do you have any comments, Vance? Yeah, Carpocrates has always been a weird one for me. I can't peg him down. What is he? He's like
I've been
everything.
I've been kind of into the ancient Greeks and Plato and Plotinus and so forth. I was off by a couple hundred years there when I said Neoplatonists, but I feel a real strong influence from Plato and the Greek philosophies. Mm-hmm. From them, so it's kind of almost like they're hybrids. And no Yaldabaoth, I mean, that's very telling of Platonism.
He did say that the angels rule. The church father said the angels do rule this universe, and there is a monad. But like you said, this place was kind of a benign gym, like David said. So,
well, I think Plato kind of portrayed the universe that way. And we all know that the Gnostics were influenced by Plato and the Greek philosophies.
Yeah, and Carpocrates has like the perfect balance: Jesus, Pythagoras, Plato, and they all work. Bible, the Republic, the Timaeus. So it's rare to see.
Yeah, it's very enlightening. I didn't realize that about the Carpocratians. I thought they were snake guys.
Well, it's so hard because there's so many sects in Alexandria. It's hard to keep up who was doing. I mean, they were so independent. They were like lodges. I'll do this, you'll do that. It's
and the timelines, right? Like I was wondering, well, Hypatia of Alexandria, where did she come in? But I guess she was a little bit after the Carpocratians.
oh yeah, maybe a couple
Yeah.
hundred years. She was the effect after Augustine. Augustine was an old guy, and by then, by Hypatia was right. When Christianity was just crushing pagan Rome for good. That was it.
Yeah. So, but there might have been some overlap when some people were younger and they listened to older people or whatever. There's always that going on.
Mm-hmm. I think, Joanna, who said something on Marcellina and Miriam? That was Celsus. Celsus said that she was an apostle. He's not completely clear, but she was an apostle like Martha, Salome, and Mary Magdalene. So she was part of that vibe. And he thought that like Salome was the leader of the Carpocratians, which was kind of a breakaway Carpocratian. And Martha was the leader of this group and that group. So the Celsus, you had this female apostolic group. And Salome is, like I said, she appears in the Gospel of Thomas. She appears in the Gospel of the Egyptians. She appears in the Pistis Sophia. She appears in some traditions. So there's another teacher that we wish we knew we had more, but was still very important. So, these Gnostic groups definitely had some power-hitting women who, again, had their own churches, their own movements, their own were the foundation of the creation of religions. So it was, Celsus. So there was a lot going. Yeah, that is true, freethinker. Salome does make it in Carl Jung's Red Book. She is an important character or part of his soul speaking to him. So Jung.
Wonder if the Romans had any records of, of her.
I don't know. They probably did. But again, so much was disappeared. We don't know what happened to Marcellina's church. She had a successful church, and it just, whatever she did got vanished.
The Romans have to license churches, I wonder. They were kind of like that, right? They were very bureaucratic, so she might have had to have a license, in which case maybe the records would exist. But those are interesting things to
Unless it was an Airbnb.
Yeah, it didn't have to have a building, right? I mean, a church could be any gathering of people in any particular public place.
Well, she had her poster of Jesus. I mean, poster.
It could have been in her house, though. I don't know.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, pity she didn't put it on Instagram or something.
Right.
But the only thing I wanted to say is the point. Two things I wanted to say. Actually, I got a few points. I hope you guys can indulge me. There was a scholar, and I would have brought it up to David. I have no problem. I mean, I sat there for 3 hours talking to David in Chicago, and we argued and debated about so much. He's a fun guy to hang out with, and he's open-minded, and he's not critical, but just a great scholar. But there's another scholar that I follow called Dan McClellan, and he says there's two things he learned in grad school. Number one, the map is not the territory. Number two, all models are wrong. Some models are useful. So in other words, everything we're talking about tonight is probably wrong, but what's useful is like the term Gnosticism. The term Gnosticism, as much as scholars hate it, it's useful and it's not going to go anywhere. You and I wouldn't have a show, and David probably wouldn't have students if you started calling them alternative Christians or biblical demiurges. It's a useful model. Yeah, the truth, unless we go back in time and talk to Marcellina and Valentinus and Irenaeus, is probably completely different than what we could have imagined, but these models are useful. So just like the Hinduism is a weird term, paganism is a weird term, but
Buddhism
they work. Buddhism is so varied. It's one of the most varied religions in the world, but it's useful, so we're going to use it. So I don't have a problem calling Carpocrates a Gnostic. He's obviously some scholars say he's the body positive branch of the Gnostic religion. So maybe that's useful. Who knows? The other thing I wanted to say too is, and this is from Jason Reza Georgiani, But he talks about there's a Persian group called the Mazdakites, and they were like sort of they were really into the Persian version of Mithras. And he traces their theology to starting right around when Carpocrates was going around. And the Mazdakites had the same philosophy as Carpocrates and Epiphanes, no property, no marriage, swap your wife, swap your husband, no rules, no case, no all that. The Mazdakites thrived, but during the Sassanid Empire, probably around the 6th century, early 6th century, a king adopted the Mazdakite religion for the Persian Empire. So for 30 years, the Persian Empire was a hippie haven. 30 years, there was no harems, there was no law marriages, there was no property rights.
Communist Persians.
Yeah, for 30. And you know what?
What happened?
Nothing. The empire continued. It went fine. The mighty Persian Empire that had, Rome on one side and all these other enemies went fine. The problem happened is then there was another king, and the more orthodox conservative Zoroastrian priest kind of got in his ear. He turned on Mazdak, on the Mazdakites, and he had them persecute, outlaw. Hundreds of thousands of people were taken. Things went back to the old way of property rights, monogamous marriage, and all that other good stuff. But it did work for 30 years. This kind of, as Jason calls it, this Carpocratian, Mazdakite, Frankton kind of style. So the thing in the Persian Empire is that after the Mazdakites were destroyed, there was a lot of tension between all the power players in Persia, and there was infighting for another generation, created a weak Persian Empire, and guess who came? The Muslims came in and destroyed the Persian Empire. So I think this idea of no property, that from the Stoics to the Cynics to the Carpocratians to the Mazdakites, and then you've got the Frankian Jews, you've got this thing that has worked, and it can work as a society. It's not my preferred.
No. I think it's like the libertarians. Libertarianism only works if every single person is libertarian and stays that way. As soon as you get people that want to make rules or want to enslave other people, they gather together, they get their weapons and so forth, and they make the rules, the golden rule. As the gold makes the rules.
Yeah.
The food, the farmers, right? We're not going to feed you unless you do what we say. That's humans.
Yeah,
that's human nature.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in the whole why song, but I'm certainly an anarchist. I think every person should have the means of production, and nobody should no human should own another human or violate their rights. But
totally, I believe that.
Mm-hmm. So, and like my son Sebastian came up to me the other day, and there's a meme he showed me, and he was very happy and thinking this meme. It's about the guy he's making fun of a monkey, like, you're primitive monkey, you haven't invented anything like that. And then the monkey turns around him and goes, you're the only animal on earth who has to pay for things. And then the human drops his head, realizing, the rest of nature just takes what it wants. It's all there. That's the whole argument of Epiphanes, was that God gives you, in his mind as a 2nd century, the God gives you enough for everybody. There's enough in this planet for everybody. But
problem is, it's not always in the place you want it.
Yeah, droughts, earthquakes,
right?
And
right.
Animals.
Look at the way the chimpanzees and so forth are. They have a society. They have territories. They have the alpha chimpanzees and so forth. They push the other ones off, and they take all the good girls for themselves and push all the beta chimpanzees off into the distance.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, they do have certain dolphins had really strong politics. Is reason definitely creates problems.
I think dolphins probably are the closest, though, to what you're saying. That there's got to be an agreement between the beings that they respect each other and they value each other and they help each other. There's got to be that's the real It's the golden rule, right? That's what I like about Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have Stephen the Storyteller. He's got a super chat. New subscriber here. Can you summarize who Marcellina was? I unfortunately came late to this dialogue. All right, let me explain. No, let me sum up, taking from the Dread Pirate Robert. Oh, was it Inigo Montoya, I believe. Let me sum up. Marcellina was a self-called Gnostic female teacher who came from Alexandria to Rome in the 2nd century, and she set up a church. She had the original portrait of Jesus, and she continued this Carpocratian Gnosticism in Rome. She was basically in early Christian times the only female individual who's ever established a new church, a Christian church in Rome, and probably the Western Empire in those days. So she was known to be extremely intelligent. She was attractive or charismatic with her words, maybe her looks, we don't know. And she scared the living shit out of the church, as Irenaeus, as David was saying. Irenaeus said that she exterminated many. I think in some it's translated she seduced countless of people, but she got the church father. She was a huge threat to the church fathers, and they hated her almost as much as Simon Magus or Marcion or some of the others. So Marcellina is one of those, again, overlooked early female Gnostic or Christian leaders that we like to give attention to. So I hope that helps, Stephen. Again, David does bring out a lot in his book. I would definitely check it out.
And she wasn't a prude.
She wasn't a prude.
That's a summary about what David was saying, right?
No. If she was a Carpocratian, she was always about. She was all definitely about being open-minded and mystic and using reason and all that. So, like, was it Hypatia? Hypatia was different. Hypatia, she actually said that she did not feel she needed to be bound by the flesh and her body. So there's this famous time where she's giving a lecture and she pulls out her bloody rag and throws it in front of her students and says, "See, this is not what I'm about. I'm about higher reason and things." So the Neoplatonists, who are supposed to be more body positive than the Gnostics, were not, because we know that Plotinus said some nasty things about the body, and Hypatia certainly had no time for being feminine or a woman. No time. She was too busy. So let's see, what else did I wanted to talk about? Yeah, I talked about Dan McClan. Also, I find interesting too, if you want to know about another of these Carpocratian, we talked about them tonight too, the Shakers and others, the Frankish Jews, the Mazdakites. There's a whole bunch. I'm sure in the East, I'm sure Joanna knows plenty herself. I'm thinking about the Agori and probably others. There's plenty of, I'm sure, libertine groups of those in the East. But Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author of The Scarlet Letter, he was a hippie. He lived in a hippie commune in the 19th century Boston. And it was all like that.
Really?
No wives, no property. I mean, people don't realize one of the most decadent places in the world was colonial America in the Northeast. I mean, it was just it was like Mardi Gras every day. And Nathaniel Hawthorne lived in this hippie commune of no property or anything. And he wrote, some of the greatest books in American literature. But that's where liberalism really started in 18th, 19th century Boston with these hippies. And that's where the American abolitionist movement started, and all these great ideas from these messed up hippies who were probably like Epiphanes, these kind of guys just writing their cool ideas in the hippie commune and swapping wives. So it's interesting how these ideas can come, because again, American liberalism did come from, yes, Boston and that area in the 18th, 19th century, and it was it was Mardi Gras. It was insane.
Well, I guess I missed it. I lived in that area for a couple of years in the 70s, so
You missed the good times.
I missed it. Oh, there's some hippies there still, but they're all conservative looking or acting or something, from my point of view.
Yeah, for sure.
Who knows what goes on behind closed doors?
Awesome. Well, let me know, guys. Do we have any questions before we wrap it up? I'm trying to think. I don't think they have any house cleaning. Next show will be I am making public my presentation I did, I think, last April on Simon Magus, who was Simon Magus, with some very cool bonuses. And if you thought Marcellina was cool, wait till you really understand and get the whole holistic picture of Simon Magus and his consort Helen, who's right up with Marcellina when it comes to, early Christian female leaders. So I will be making that public. And then I believe next Friday we're going to have an AB Live events with the mighty Robert Price on the holy scapegoat and all this other sacrifice.
Morning
and all
show.
So, and a lot of other good stuff coming out this month. So, yeah, lots of good stuff. And I really appreciate your company. I appreciate your support. And I appreciate everybody being here. Great questions from everybody. Great comments. There was a sex bot out there in the comment section, which that happens once in a while.
Well, Carpocratian show,
Carpocration bot.
Right. It's bound to happen, Libertine. What do you want? But I had to snuff it.
Yeah, that's a dude. I've seen it when I watch other live shows. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self, here in the desert of the real. And I'll probably have a bonus with this show, but I really appreciate you being here. And thank you, Vance, for keeping us company as well.
Hey, love it. Love being here. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. And sweet dreams if you're a woman with Epiphanes. Sweet dreams if you're a man with Marcellina. Or if you have different tastes than a man with Epiphanes, or whatever makes you get you that gnosis. Sweet dreams.